as Director of Interfaith Action of Southwest Michigan. I'm delighted with everyone's attendance this evening for this very exciting program, which is a part of our Common Life series. Our Common Life series is focused on building understandings of different faith communities as a foundation for our collaborative action on behalf of justice in our local community and indeed around the world. I'm very excited to engage in a discussion of our book topic for this evening, The Beauty of Your Face. I was initially attracted to the book because of the Palestinian roots of the author. I happen to have an informally adopted son from small community called Zababda in Palestine, who now is in Chicago and finishing a medical school. So when I read about the book in the New York Times, I was initially drawn by the Palestinian connection and was surprised but emotionally inspired by the fact that the book did not draw on Palestine, but drew on the realities of a Muslim community in the Midwest and exposed me to the emotions of that reality and connected me in my gut to the fears around anti-Muslim terrorism. So it's a delight for me to share with all of you this evening in a discussion of the beauty of your face. And with that, I'll turn the program over to my colleague, Naveen Khalil, to introduce the rest of the evening. Naveen?
Hear you. Okay, welcome everybody. I was muted. I would like to welcome everybody. I see we have some friends from afar. Jalen Halawi is actually in Egypt. She's listening in from there. We have Romana is in Chicago and Brandy's in Atlanta. And they're all very excited to attend this with us and listen to this. And we're going to have questions. I know Sahar will speak a little and give us a few words about the book. And then we'll have a short reading from the book by her. And then we'll open it up to questions. So I hope everybody's ready for that. Thank you.
I want to first say thank you so much for hosting me. These are my favorite events. You know, I've been doing Zoom sessions because my book was actually published just a few weeks after the pandemic and everything got shut down, excuse me. Hopefully not too many things got shut down in terms of ideas. And it has been on such a wonderful journey. I think had that not occurred, I would not have had this amazing reach. So I've been in spaces, you know, all over the world. And I'm just so heartened by people who've engaged in it. But book clubs are just like my favorite, and the Interfaith just really inspires me. So I just want to thank you for giving me, you know, some time to read and to discuss this book. I think, you know, I'll do, you know, what we call the, you know, elevator pitch, just a quick blurb for folks who have not gotten into the book yet. So The Beauty of Your Face begins in a Muslim American school just outside of Chicago. Afaf Rahman is the principal, and she's just going about her daily responsibilities, and takes a break in what used to be a confessional. So this building has been taken over, has gone through different changes since the Depression, and was once or originally a convent. And so this is her place of reprieve. When she hears what she thinks is firecrackers, and she thinks it's because they are constantly harassed in this neighborhood, and then comes to realize very quickly that it's not, and that an active shooter has entered the building. So what ends up happening is we get swept back in time over the decades of Afaf's life, and we are on this journey to the point where she comes face to face with the shooter, and it's interspersed with the shooter's point of view, but those chapters are much shorter, and he keeps the present tense. And for me, it was a very deliberate disruption of Afaf's story. So I wanted the audience to be constantly reminded of that threat, that danger. And I'll talk more about how that also affected, me getting this published, if we get a chance to talk about that later. So that is the synopsis. And what I thought, might be fitting is for me to read. And I don't think this is going to be a spoiler, but this is when Afaf is older. So we started in 1976, but I'm going to read the decade. This is just a few months after 9/11. And she and her husband and her father, Baba, have decided that they were going to go to Hajj, and then 9/11 happens, and her husband and Baba still want to go. She has major reservations, as you can imagine. So I'm going to read the end of that chapter and then into when she makes it to Hajj. And I can talk a little bit about why I think this is a significant moment. So she's at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, and has been taken aside and asked to strip. Please undress to your undergarments. Afaf strips down to her long slip. A beautiful woman stands across from her, her white cotton bra and half slip gleaming against her black skin. She looks over at Afaf, her eyes impassive. Afaf closes her eyes as another female officer waves a metal detector over her body. Her face flushes hot with humiliation, perspiration gathering between her breasts. This isn't like a visit to the doctor's office for her annual pap smear, or crouching among the Muslimat at the communal washroom to perform wudu. She suddenly sees with the terror of being exposed. What if the partitions topple over, 100 strangers gawking and pointing at her partial nakedness? I'm going to be sick, Afaf tells the officer. The vomit heaves from her throat and she retches into a wastebasket. Someone quickly hands her. No reason to be nervous, ma'am, unless you've got something to hide, the officer says with a sneer. Afaf squeezes her eyes shut again as her stomach churns. When she can finally dress again and is permitted to fasten her hijab, Afaf is physically drained and a trickle of bile is tickling her throat. The officer leads her out of the makeshift room and she immediately spots Bilal and Baba. They wave and she catches more steely stares as Bilal hugs her. She bites her lip, refusing to cry. Are you all right? She nods, forces a smile. I need to use the restroom. She walks around the custodian mopping the floor and splashes cool water on her face. She catches a woman next to her staring at Afaf's reflection in the mirror, unsmiling. Afaf stares right back, defiant. The woman drops her eyes, lathering her hands noisily. When she passes behind Afaf, the woman flicks water at her headscarf. Shame on you, Afaf snaps back. What have I done to you? What has she done to any of them? Is she not a citizen of this country like them? How naive to believe she's ever really belonged, with and without her hijab, before and after a terrorist attack. You're all evil, bitch. The woman's awful words trail behind her like the streaks from the custodian's dirty mop across the tiled floor. The other women quickly rinse their hands, herd their young children out, roll their luggage past Afaf, not looking her way. One snickers before closing her stall door. Afaf leans against the mirror, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She wants to ask these strangers how she, one woman, a mother and wife, a teacher, if they'd only ask, can be a menace to them. How can she make them unafraid? She lets the tears roll. Are you all right, miss? An old white woman pats Afaf's shoulder. I'm fine. The woman turns on the faucet next to her. Human beings can be awful. She smiles kindly at Afaf in the mirror. Will this be life from now on? Afaf asks her. The woman is silent, gives Afaf a weak shrug, and dries her hands. The first time Afaf felt amen in her belly, it was like a delicate flutter of wings. A tiny human being was growing inside her, absorbing her nutrients, quietly thriving. The pain of his birth was so extraordinary, then instantly, miraculously, it halted as soon as he slipped out, and she'd been lightheaded with euphoria. But in this place, no earthly experience has prepared Afaf for the holy city of Mecca, a marvelous clash between antiquity and modernity. Lavish hotels break up the desert sky. Cars speed along busy highways driven by men and women clad in black niqab, only their eyes staring back at Afaf. A gigantic clock tower, its ticking mechanism designed to last 100 years, stand outside of the Masjid al-Haram, where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac before an angel of God intervened. The holy mosque teems with thousands upon thousands of men and women from every walk of life, every corner of the planet, moving in one direction, counterclockwise, bodies huddled close to each other in a wave of white like clouds across the sky. The opulence of the outside world is temporarily discarded. And I'm going to pause there. I just want to say, I chose that passage because it for me created this clash, of alienation, being ostracized, the horror of 9/11, and then the aftermath, and then Afaf and her family members arriving to the pilgrimage, and it being just this sharp, contrast. And I think about how people who are in these liminal spaces, who are either immigrants or migrants, who are second, third generation, are having to, occupy these spaces, carry these spaces, and having to navigate them, and what that looks like. So that's one of the reasons why I chose that particular passage.
Beautiful. No, and your novel is so poignant because it does take us into moments and places and spaces that we would not experience. For me, I am an Arab Muslim woman in the United States, but still, your novel had so many revelations for me as well. I'd like to start off just with the beginning of your journey of how you got this book published.
So let's see, I had already written a short story collection, and I was pretty lucky. So that was my MFA work. And that went on to be published by a small press that champions writers of color. So I was very grateful. When I was thinking about The Beauty of Your Face, it was basically a story that I knew was going to be a novel. And if folks don't know, it was inspired by the real life hate shootings of the young Muslim Americans in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Yusor Abu Salha, her husband and her sister, who were shot in cold blood by their white neighbor. And so that rattled me, as it still does, as it did for many communities, immediately the Muslim community. And as an educator, I'm a high school teacher. It was different from the short story that I wrote about a young student who brings a gun to school because he's just been so bullied, so harassed. That was different. That dynamic, we also see play out in, I think, a lot of the school shootings. But this was different because this was an adult, who'd been radicalized, and it was just a completely different dynamic, and one that, quite frankly, frightened me, to my core. And I was just so sorry for the victims and the people who loved them. So I knew I would have to be really sensitive about how I would basically take this inspiration. And it's not them, obviously, these characters are completely, removed from those three. But I knew that I could tell the story, I could do it through fiction, and we were talking about this earlier before the session began, stories immediately disarm people, especially those communities who are not familiar, with the subject, with the characters of a particular story. So I knew that I had this power to draw readers in, and they would then be on this journey with Afaf. And I'm so heartened because I've received messages that indicate I never really was close, to Muslims or Arab Americans. And this really just, got me closer, and that is high praise. I really appreciate that. The difficulty though, in getting this published. So I workshopped it in a novel in a year class under the mentorship of Rebecca Mackay, who's a wonderful writer. She wrote The Great Believers, which was nominated for the National Book Prize and then the Pulitzer. And that draft didn't quite work. So, I call it my exploratory draft. I realized that I'd have to go to the beginning. And that first draft was about multiple characters. And I realized, wait, if I'm going to tell a story about a tragedy like this, I needed to go and back, and I wanted to present their origin stories, as I call them. I think, we just don't provide enough spaces for us as human beings to tell our stories. We all have stories. We're all coming from different places, and it's those experiences and then choices and then forces beyond our control that bring us to these critical moments in time. So I think if we make space for that and we investigate those things, then I think we'd be a much better society, is my belief. So what ended up happening is I got a lot of resistance from agents. So I was querying agents, and they loved Afaf. They loved her story, but they wanted me to drop the shooter. And that is really indicative of, the white publishing industry that wanted to package this as just an immigrant story, which is actually, kind of inaccurate, because Afaf is a second generation. Her parents are immigrants. And so, I was really concerned, when I kept getting those responses and people trying to persuade me that, it will sell if we, just drop the shooter. But, I stuck by this vision with, my confidence being, shattered. But then I'm like, let's just see what a few more months will bring me. And luckily I landed with an agency that really just loved it. And, there was one or two major things that changed that really service the book. And, maybe I can talk about those, secrets later, but don't also want to give away too much if readers, if audience members have not read it. And so I was happy that I found the support to present this vision. And I don't think that there's, another story like this with a white domestic terrorist, as far as I know. I think, we've been sort of inundated with the, suicide bombers or stories of, young first and second generation Arabs and Muslims who, hate their families, want to be, American. And I have Afaf, who actually goes towards, her religion and faith. And, this is a story that I'm interested in because it's a story, I suppose, that I was sort of craving and felt authentic. And, Norton picked it up. It was actually also vetted by another publisher, which is really great, for a first novel. So I feel pretty grateful. And despite the pandemic, it's been on this terrific journey.
As do we, indeed. Okay, I'd like to open up the floor now for questions. If you have a question, I have questions that were submitted when people registered for this event. But we can begin with people right here with us, if you like. I can't see everybody at once, so maybe you could just raise your hand or unmute yourself and start talking. Romana, I see you unmuted. Are you ready?
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for joining us and talking to us. And I haven't read your book, but I'm really curious to read it as a Muslim American, especially someone that was born and raised in the Chicago area. I was curious as to where you teach high school.
I'm actually at Homewood Flossmoor High School,
Okay,
which is,
I know
yeah.
exactly.
Okay,
exactly
great. Yeah,
so,
and I've been there actually for 25 years, so.
So I am going to definitely pick up your book because I'm a member of the community, and your novel sounds really interesting. And I do think it's interesting that, you know, a lot of Muslim Americans, whenever there are stories about us, it's always about focusing on how someone doesn't like where they come from and they're trying to break free from it, and it's kind of keeping them jailed. And I do like hearing these stories about experiences that are different than that. So I do look forward to reading your
I
book.
appreciate that. You know, I think readers are going to find so many familiar things, and then they're going to be new things, which I'm really, that's what I love about being a fiction writer, is I do want to surprise. I do want to offer a unique story, which is why I just focused on Afaf, because I could fully, you know, pay attention to her. So it's great to hear people say, I remember feeling that, or I remember that happening, you know, in my, and especially like immediate family members who are like, you know, we can see a little bit of maybe, you know, certain people who are close to us, but it is purely fiction. And yeah, again, you know, getting at this, this narrative that expands how we see Arab and Muslim communities. And you'll find too, if you haven't read it, it's also a flawed community. So I've also been, you know, I've read books where there's like the very pious and saintly Muslim, and then, you know, someone who's completely rejected. And so always these extremes, it seems. And Afaf actually, she was grappling with faith. And even within her family, we find that they're still divided. And again, that just, it allowed me to present a real nuanced experience, you know, of being a Muslim. And I was also concerned about, you know, what am I appropriating here? I didn't want anyone to feel like, well, that's not my story. And it's mostly been, this is the first story that makes me feel seen, that doesn't, again, inflate those stereotypes. And that is just so wonderful to hear, for sure.
Brenda?
Yes, I don't have a question at the moment. I'm sure I will as the evening goes on. Romana, I just wanted to say to you, it is one of the best books I have read in a long time.
Oh my.
The writing, and I'm going to suggest it to my book club when it's my turn, which is soon, I think. But it is, I didn't expect it to be a page turner.
Oh,
I
really appreciate that.
Yeah, I am not exaggerating. I mean, the writing, everything about it was great. And the story, the way you wove the different time periods, I don't want to give away too much either, but, and I would love to see it from someone else's perspective, or, you know, Muslim's perspective.
Yeah.
But, oh, I just absolutely loved it. I just
Thank you.
thought it was great.
So a message that I got that was a complaint, but then a celebration, was family members and friends who were like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm like reading this book like for hours. And I you know, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for saying that, and for also recommending it, because that's also something I can tell you as a writer, as an author, to me, it feels like a double burden. And actually Rita Dove, the amazing poet, I was actually in a Zoom, she did a Zoom for English teachers a few weeks ago. She had said something years ago that stays with me about how the, quote, hyphenated writer isn't just going to present a story that might not be familiar, but they have to do it well. Like they have to, you know, the writing has got to be good. So that really makes me happy. Thank you for saying that. I think people will come to it because they're intrigued about the subject and the plot, but then I'm so glad the writing, you know, carries you through. Thank you.
I did read it through the time change. So you owe me some sleep.
I'm
great.
Still dragging from that, quite frankly.
Yeah, I am too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, Nancy, I see you unmuted. Did you want to speak?
Well, I would like to ask a question. I must confess that I have not read the book, but I have read a lot about the book. And after hearing you this evening, I certainly intend to read the book. The central character, Afaf, I get the impression that she is a very strong woman. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the inspiration for that character.
You're going to find almost quickly just how challenged and fractured Afaf actually is, you know, at the beginning. And so it's Islam that helps her to, you know, sort of seal the cracks in herself, helps her with forgiveness in terms of a very dysfunctional family. And I think what readers end up going away with is the strength that you know, you are alluding to. When I was redrafting, I saw Afaf as the principal, actually as a teacher first, and then, you know, she sort of became a principal. And that was very close to me being an educator. So, you know, a lot of this is going to come certainly from that experience. And so I was thinking about, you know, being Muslim and then having to take care of students, and, you know, you're nurturing them, you're having to protect them. But then, as I said earlier, I couldn't just present Afaf in the present and even the shooter in the present without going back in time. And so as soon as I saw Afaf as an adult, it was very easy to then start going back. In fact, the most challenging chapter for me was her teenage years, which I think I just want to block anyways. I think that's probably why. And I'm so far from Afaf. So some people will ask me, you know, is she based on you and your experiences? I'm actually more like Majid. So when you get to him, you'll appreciate that. He is sort of a straight arrow, kind of a nerd. So I can identify. So having to write the challenges when she's a teenager, that took a little more work. So Afaf in the beginning was clear. And then when she's 10 years old, I was certainly drawing from what it was like to be a child in the late 70s and early 80s. And that those are scenes that I got a lot of, you know, wonderful messages from friends and family saying, I remember what that was like. And some of them in tears, you know, conveying that to me. So certainly, you know, I'm drawing from those firsthand experiences. And again, things that I knew would be familiar. So yeah, I think, you know, these are also stories that I have heard, that I have been told, and of course, me fictionalizing them and making them my own, and making them in a way that also served Afaf and were true to Afaf. I hope that answers that question.
It does. So part of
Right.
her strength comes from particulars, and
Yes, yeah.
and part of her strength comes from her general
Yeah,
background.
and it feels like in maybe unlikely places and with unlikely people. So I think it's a really neat journey that readers are on with her, and some definitely some rough moments. I also got those really angry texts, like at certain parts, you know, when characters were behaving badly, you know, especially towards her. And yeah, it's, again, I just hope I presented a very complex person who we see evolve, you know, over the decades.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will.
Thank you.
Can I just add, the audio version's very good too. The
Oh my gosh.
narrators- I
Thank
had
you for
both
saying
going
that, Brenda.
at
Yes.
the same time.
I heard, so here's what's really cool. So in my contract, I got to choose who the readers would be. And of course I have no
Oh.
experience. So Audible, they have a whole host, right, of actors. And I got to hear some audio, and I was so thrilled because the woman who does Afaf's parts, and it's third person, she is actually Palestinian American. So I felt an affinity immediately with her. And so it was so great because with her and the other who actually has done some work for Showtime, so I felt very cool by association, you know, it was so great collaborating, and them reaching out to me and saying, is this how you intended it to sound? And, you know, and that was just really neat. With the Lamis Ishaq is the reader. She sent me a beautiful email saying how much she enjoyed reading this, and that even the technicians who are really supposed to just be listening were really engrossed. And I said, wow, thank you, because it is so beautiful. My husband and I listened to it, and I would recommend that too, for sure. Yeah, good job.
My mother-in-law is legally blind and we share books. So what I did is I bought both. So that she right now is listening to it.
Oh, I
She
love
just started it. So
it just makes it feel, I mean, it's a performance, really.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just feel so lucky, to have had them both, be on it. I think I'd probably reach out to her again for my next projects for sure.
Pat, I see you unmuted. Would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it was the part about Afef as a teenager that I found so compelling and so compassionate because, just remembering what it was like to be a teenager in high school and then all of the things that she was dealing with. I thought you did a brilliant job of that.
Oh,
And it's
thank
interesting
you.
that you say that was the most
Yeah.
challenging era.
Yeah. And, in that chapter, readers will see, she is rejected from her Arab community, from her white peers and even from her teachers, which also is not my experience. And I feel very fortunate. So I had teachers who were constantly advocating for me, except for one. And I've actually told the story about her in like some live lit storytelling events. And so I've always been just lifted up. And I think now, though, is that because I was also a good student? So I wonder, because I have one sister who didn't have that same experience, and she did have what I would call probably more microaggressive experiences with teachers. So I also think about, is this sort of like the good immigrant? Even though I'm second, is that was that a factor? But I try not to dwell on that, because I became a teacher because I had really terrific teachers too. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
All right. Donna, you're unmuted.
I am.
Yes. Do you want to say something? Shall I go to submitted questions?
Well, I did read the book. I didn't realize I was ready to talk, but I did read the book and I loved it. And I have participated in another book study that Beth Carnegie led. And it was a great book discussion. It was a learning experience for all of us. And I think the way we learn to get along in the world is to understand other people's experiences better. And I certainly think this book lends that to us. So I'm grateful I had a chance to read it. I thought it was a wonderful story. And I taught teenagers myself, and I loved seeing the growth that came throughout this young woman's life. And I won't go into particulars because none of us want to spoil the story for those who haven't read it. But Nancy mentioned she seemed like a confident woman, but that came at great cost. Yeah. And that's all I will say. I loved it. Thank you for writing it. And I hope we'll see more from you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sid, I saw your hand was raised.
Yes. The passage that you read was one of many passages in the book that provided this powerful emotional connection to an experience of discriminatory or racist attitudes and behaviors. And then also the reader is connected to the gnawing fear of the active shooter. How did you capture these powerful emotions through interviews with people, through your own experiences, or through the brilliance of your art?
Thank you. I think it's a little bit of everything, actually. I think I'm, brilliance is great. I definitely, have to, do research and things, but my favorites are from those direct stories and experiences of others. But with the shooter in particular, even including him, for me, just speaks to the value of stories. And I won't, I'll confess here that I was worried that my immediate communities were going to be angry and say, why are you even giving the shooter space? So why does he get page time, right? And I realized, wait a second, I'm a fiction writer. I'm a storyteller. So I think, my responsibility, I think, is to reveal our humanity. And that's what I'm interested in. And that's why I was interested in also taking the journey with the shooter. And I saw him very clearly. In fact, I saw him before I even saw FF. So I saw him in these other characters that didn't quite, evolve for me. And I was drawn to that because when that real life shooting happened, my thing was, who is this man? Where was he coming from? What is this decision, to pick up a gun and go knock on your neighbor's door? It was horrifying to me, but it was still a human being making that decision, right? And that's what I really wanted to get at. And I wanted to do it in a way that I hope did not feel like a stock kind of character. I wanted to present him as, all the things that we have also heard about, people who are radicalized. I wanted to get at, what were his wounds? What were, what was his, origin story? What were, what hurt was he carrying? And amazingly, and I didn't think about this consciously, and I think people in this audience probably realize that too, there are actually things that parallel Afaf and the shooter in terms of their losses that I wasn't thinking about consciously. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that actually, wow, okay, they both had that experience. And that was really gratifying. So I know some things were emerged and maybe they were just always there. And of course, then presented themselves on the page. So that is my mission. I'm always going to write as closely as I can about what it means to be human. And it's not going to be the same thing for every single person. So when people challenge me and say, well, this is not exactly my experience, then to me, this becomes a window. So I always tell my students, my high school students, stories, literature, it's a window or it's a mirror, right? So you're going to be either looking in to somebody else's experience, or you're going to be seeing something familiar, reflected back. And I'm so happy that I found an agent who understood that this is not a graphically violent book, and it's still incredibly disturbing because, he does end up, massacring, these students. And but we get to see, what drives him to this point without justifying it. In the end, it's really about understanding where we're all coming from, but not making excuses. But making space, for those stories. And I feel very, very firmly, especially when it comes to young people who are troubled, who end up committing violence. I feel like, we've let them down because we haven't given them anything more than maybe, one session with a social worker or with their counselor. And I'm thinking back to the Parkland shooter who, there's documentation that shows that he was quite troubled, right? And he just wasn't getting what he needed. And that feels like such a failure of society. So of course there's a difference, that's a younger person, but let's not discount that we're all wounded children still. So I can be honest and say, I'm still very much my 7-year-old self. In certain situations, I go right back to that. And I feel very vulnerable. So it was really so valuable. And it really challenged me as a writer to take that point of view. I can tell you, I read a wonderful nonfiction book by a Norwegian journalist, and she's written about many experiences that have been documented. The book that I read was called One of Us, and it was about a white domestic terrorist who goes to a socialist youth camp in Norway, and he shoots and he massacres. But what she does is she presents it where you forget that it's nonfiction. So she basically takes us back. And I was so intrigued by that. And I went back to that story and I thought, whoa, here's this humanizing when we don't want to give time for that. And I understand that, and especially when you are the victim's family, I completely understand. but she did that so beautifully, and I thought, okay, for me, fiction gives me that buffer, and there are things that I can control, things, and as you know, I don't name him because that was just getting too close. And, you know, I knew it. You know, I'm like, I can't. I never even considered a name. I just, so yeah, I hope that answers your question, Sid. You know,
Thank you.
thank you. And I'll say also the pilgrimage, that was the other challenging. I had to research that the most because I haven't been, you know, I haven't gone on the pilgrimage. And it was so lovely to find the daily journals and blogs of Muslim women who were tracking that journey. And I was, because of course there are all kinds of tourist, you know, manuals and things like that. And it was just so wonderful to get that intimate, you know, experience of what that was like. And again, I, you know, hopefully that was depicted, you know, authentically.
Thank you. Okay, one of the questions that were submitted, meals and music are woven throughout the narrative. What is their significance in the book and the immigrant experience?
Yeah, I so appreciate this. A reviewer said something about how this book should have had like a recipe glossary at the back, and I just love that. And in fact, this book has also been published in the UK and then in Italy, which is so amazing that this has, you know, been translated. And my Italian publisher, every week before it was launched, we're giving those meals recipes, and it was just so cool to see. I so appreciate readers who loved and really were moved by the food and the music. I'll say this about both. To me, it you know, food and music are such universal experiences, right? I mean, again, breaking bread, you know, with other people, and you know, music especially connecting us in ways that maybe you know, just reading about a particular culture, like in an encyclopedia, in a news report, is just not going to do, right? So these kinds of things also help preserve the character's heritage. So, you know, it's Baba playing the oud, the lute, and it's Mama, you know, cooking these meals that also keep her rooted, right, in Palestinian Arab culture. So yeah, those are just, you know, emblems of heritage and things that, you know, we also return to, we find solace in, we find comfort in, we find community in. So there's also that part later on when the women are making the mahmoud, those cookies, and it's so incredible for someone like Afaf, and that's when she's a teenager, and even that, you know, brings her into that community of women, and it's so wonderful. For me, I've had wonderful experiences with my sisters and I. Before my mom passed away, we'd all gather around and we would make the rolled or the stuffed grape leaves. And then my mom would tell us stories. And there were things that we just discovered every time we gathered that we didn't know. And it wasn't until we asked her the question. So she was not going to, you know what I mean? And I'm like, and that's what we need. As soon as you turn to someone and say, you know, tell me a story about a time you felt like you didn't belong. Tell me about a person whose friendship you basically saved your life. You know what I mean? And those kinds of things. And you can do that through food. You can do that, of course, you know, through music. So thank you for recognizing that. Yeah. And that continues to be something that I include in all of my works. You know, I also like when characters find joy. So when there's a lot of struggle, to me, this is the way to infuse joy in the lives of my characters. So I want to also give them the space to also have these wonderful and happy moments that allow them to then get up the next day for the struggle, you know, and for the conflict.
Fantastic. Okay, it felt that the disappearance of the older sister Neda symbolizes the loss of the homeland Palestine. Would you agree?
That's really interesting. Until I you know, I heard this question, I don't know that I thought about it in that really eloquent way. for me, it was the loss of a daughter first, and what that does to a mother. But it makes absolute sense to see that as being symbolic of Mama, who could never really root herself in America. I mean, this was her struggle, and it was Neda, because they were both born in Palestine overseas. That was her connection, and until it was actually articulated that way, I'm like, yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate that interpretation for sure, because that's what makes it worse for Mama, when she's gone. And that, of course, is not giving anything away, because we get that in the first chapter, that she's disappeared. So I would say yes. To me, that is, quite an eloquent interpretation. Neda, then we see, is going to represent some other things, but don't want to spoil. But I think immediately that is really quite a beautiful representation of Mama's loss.
Speaking of the mother figure, it was rather unusual. She wasn't the warmest, fuzziest kind of mother you expected an immigrant. And then the father, on the other hand, was the not that is complete opposite of the stereotypes of what you think of the Middle East.
Yeah.
So why did you choose it that way?
Yeah, I have to say, I just absolutely adore Baba. All these characters are so real to me, but I wanted to present the Arab Muslim father in this way because of what you just said, Naveen. There's always like the swarthy, the domineering, the oppressive, Arab and Muslim men. And I, quite frankly, was just so sick of it. And you know what? Those stories continue to be told, and from members, from my own community. And it's kind of hard because, you want to say, oh, I know it sells, but, can we, let that particular stereotype go? But here's the thing about stereotypes, that the brilliant Chimamanda Adichie, who wrote Americana, she's a Nigerian writer. She talks about the danger of the single story, which I actually play for my students. It's a TED Talk. It's an essay that she wrote. She talked about how stereotypes are actually important, and they're true because of, the repeat experience. But she said they can't be the only story. So even in a single story, you have to make room for other experiences and other characters. So I knew that some characters would be maybe, classic, stereotypical, but I wanted to also present someone that readers were not going to be familiar with, or ones that were familiar, but they never get page time, right? And so Baba he was so wonderful to write. With Mama, I also wanted to address mental health issues in our community, and it was rough. I think I remember one particular book club who read this. They were wonderful. They were from the East Coast, and they had started the book club because of the pandemic, and mine was the first book that they picked up. I remember the matriarch of the family being so angry with Mama, with Muntaha, saying there's no excuse, for her behavior. And then the younger mothers in that group saying, what are you talking about? All these things that, she had to endure, she is also a woman, she was also, somebody's daughter before she became a mother and a wife. And that's also what I was interested in. So again, that was just me presenting a really complicated and fractured and complex family, And it was great to hear one of the New York Times book reviewers said, every one of these characters deserves their own book, and I've had, people say, tell me you're going to write from this person's point of view. And, it's not in the works, but that makes me happy. That tells me that these characters were quite three-dimensional and human, and that's good. That's the highest praise, I think.
Excellent. Okay, well, how did you choose the title of this book for people who haven't read it or people who have?
Yeah, so it wasn't my first title. So I knew that there might be that change just from everything that I learned from my professors and from mentors. And I realized that this title is absolutely perfect. The Beauty of Your Face is actually an excerpt from a Bosnian song that Bilal's mother sings to her grandchildren. So that comes a little bit later. So I remember working with my agents, and I had come to them with the declining day, which is actually that references the prayer that happens right in the very late afternoon, the Asr prayer. So translated, it's when the day declines, but before sunset starts to happen. And to me, it was fitting, but I think it was fitting because of my original ending. So, but I won't get into that. And so when that changed, I realized, okay, this keeps it open. And I think just like so many other things, our faces are just so emblematic of our humanity. And as soon as we put on a hijab, that complicates that, And so I suppose in many ways, this became a title that spoke to those complexities and what we see when we look in each other's faces, and again how that changes based on our color, based on hijab, based on our hair type and all that, but technically it comes from that song. Yeah.
Well, you must tell us what your original ending is now.
I don't know.
Why wouldn't you?
Well, you know what, I will, and I guess yeah, I guess I can, even for people who didn't read it, I think they're going to be happy. Okay, so here it is, drum roll. Afaf actually does not survive. So she does not survive the shooting. And I was actually in another reading. I was invited by my mentor professor at Columbia College, where I worked on my MFA. And I read that part that changed because I was basically in the editorial process. My editor from Norton, actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me take a step back. There were some other things that I worked out with my editor. It was actually my agents who said, you know what? Why can't she triumph? Why can't she survive? And it was one of those things where my mom, I was just sort of shook. I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm also, perpetuating that same narrative of the victim and you know what I mean, and the dead and the harmed, and I'm like, yeah, let's let her live. And oh my goodness, what is that going to look like? And then I won't say anything more, but it's actually kind of a really, I think, kind of empowering but very sad wrapping up that we see that happens. And so it was amazing to write her surviving that. So the idea of the declining day felt more fitting, and I think I was also getting at with the first draft, but this happens though too. There are victims. People die because of, Islamophobia, because of being afraid, because of hate, and fear mongering and all these things. Yeah.
Well, actually, that nicely brings me to the next question. How can we best be allies to immigrants and to the Muslim community specifically?
I would say it starts here, so I love, the mission that you have, the interfaith experience. I was actually looking at your mission in the about page, and, there's just something that struck me that I actually wrote down. What one of the goals being, expressing the dignity of all human beings. And I was just so touched by that. And, what does that look like? So, how do we get there? And for me, it's giving a space for stories. So, as we are trying trying to empower them and trying to give them the tools to basically survive and to integrate themselves in our communities, in our society. I don't know that we always give them time to heal, to reckon with, maybe those experiences that they're bringing. It's not always tragic. It's not always even because of war or famine or natural disasters. But I think that's what we've been seeing the most of. I mean, that's who we've been opening up our borders to. And I think, just having those stories and sharing those stories. And I think, it comes through mine, and I feel so privileged, and I feel a sense of responsibility, but directly from those immigrants. So that's my first instinct. I would love for us to also get to a place where we just normalize, our fellow Muslim citizens. Like, I think about how my experience is so different from my daughters, who are now third. And, we were all about the melting pot. And that, of course, is a paradigm that's completely failed, as has assimilation, because it's this one-way street, right? We expect the immigrant to check everything at the door. And that's very traumatic. So it feels almost like a double trauma, so they're leaving a place that they can no longer inhabit. And then they have to basically, leave their heritage, their language, and everything else behind. But I feel so optimistic. And this comes through Azmiya, the character Azmiya, Afaf's daughter, where we're going to celebrate. We're not just going to, it's no longer tolerance. We're now in acceptance, right? So it's not that you're just going to tolerate my existence. I'm going to accept you. So I'm going to absorb your experiences. I'm going to internalize them. And I think that comes through early education. And I hope I'm not like on a soapbox here, but I feel very, very firmly that we need to provide spaces for students where they can explore and begin to normalize, their neighbors and their peers, and it not just be this one shot. Oh, here comes, we're going to do like, Muslim Day, and we're going to just bring food and then that's it, right? It's got to be a lot more integrated and normalized and celebrated, to the point where, we don't bat eyelashes or, feel, that we are othering this community. I hope that answers that, Niveen. I don't have like one solution.
Okay, if nobody has any more questions, I have one final one. If you could tell us, Sahar, what else do you have in your pipeline? What can we expect soon?
Yeah. So, and I thought this was interesting that Sid said in the beginning about, this not being really about the Palestinian experience. My next project is, so it's going to be mostly set in Palestine. And I'm investigating what it's like to be privileged, someone like myself, someone like my daughters, who are in a place where we are not war-ridden. We're in America. We really have benefited from security here. We were able to thrive, and we can do what we want to do. And what it's like when someone like that goes to Palestine and thinks that she can basically save them, so to speak, and wants to do good, and then learns very quickly that it's a lot more complicated. But then I also follow two native Palestinians, which has been a really interesting experience. So it's contemporary, but then there's the historical framework. So 3 characters, and I hope it gets to everybody. So I'm finishing a 3rd draft, and I have a wonderful writing group. So I'm putting it through the ringer with them before, my agent's been waiting on it. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Sounds like a very powerful plot.
Thank you. And I hope you all do come back and, continue to follow me. I really appreciate you reading this book and, you engaging in it. It really means a lot.
Sahar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really, again, I deeply appreciate the work that you do too. So again, thank you for this lovely invitation and for sharing this book with others.
It has been recorded and it will be posted on our Interfaith website and YouTube channel if anyone wants to revisit.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sahar.
And thank you everyone who was here in this session. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Stay safe and well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.